Hey guys! So, as you know, it is mid-September, which means it's officially Halloween. And so I thought for this video, we'd do some scary things. Number one, cleaning the office candle studio, because that is always terrifying. And also, I wanted to talk about, I guess, like my top seven, as if like it's like a fun list. Like the top seven things about my business, but also probably for anyone who owns a business, like a small business. The top seven things that scare me the most about it. I know that's not like a really fun topic or anything, but honestly, I feel like from other small business owners that I've talked to and just generally how I feel, a lot of the time it just helps hearing other creators talk about the things that like they struggle with, because then you don't feel so alone. And I always try to look for resources like that of like other people doing vlogs where they kind of talk about parts of owning their own business that are difficult. And sometimes it's not always the easiest thing to find, or at least it's not presented in a way that's like what I want to hear, if that makes sense. So I just wanted to make a video about it that I would want to see, I guess. Yes, I will go over my top seven things about owning my business and running it that scare me the most. And also, like, I mean, none of it is things that I've completely overcome or anything. I think there are things that are going to be hard for me forever. But also maybe share any insight I have to kind of living with those things and dealing with them and trying to accept them, because that's really all we can do, I guess. So I'm gonna list them out just so you know what's coming, and then start cleaning and start talking about them. And these are in no particular order. These are just literally the order in which they came to me as I was making the list, which maybe subconsciously is in a particular order. The first thing that scares me about owning my own business is getting mean comments and not constructive criticism. Having imposter syndrome and not feeling good enough. Finances and general money. Making mistakes and letting customers down. Having to show up on the internet and present yourself for everyone to see all the time. Consistency and just needing to stay consistent to be successful. And last, but certainly not least, just kind of tied to the other thing about having to be on the internet, is the way that people perceive you based on your business and everything about it and what you're choosing to do with your life. So, those are the top seven things, at least currently, that scare me about owning my own business. So, I guess let's go talk about thoughts and feelings. So we're going to generally start in this area, I guess. I really don't know what's here or what I'm going to do about it, but Archie's here to help. So I guess while we're doing this, I will talk about topic number one of scary business things, which is mean comments and non-constructive criticism. I think that this is probably something that scares everyone that has any kind of presence online, but also like making way too much noise. But also just anyone. I mean, no one in life wants to have people be mean to them. It's not limited to being online. Unfortunately, people will be mean to you in person as well. It's just a universal human fear, I suppose. I know that I am lucky, which isn't a great term to have to use for this, but I'm lucky to have not faced a lot of bullying in my life and in my past. The few times that people have really been mean to me or said like mean things in school or whatever, like I remember them when they happened, but thankfully it was not something that happened all the time. Regardless, it's still something that is relatively triggering, I guess, because I know me and I am incredibly sensitive. Yeah, I mean, just like those few instances of like maybe temporary or even like one-time bullying from people, like those have stuck with me to this day. So yeah, it's something that always scares me, and I know that it's a really big problem when it comes to people online. Unfortunately, it's such a common thing to happen to people now, from people who literally don't know you. They don't know anything about you, and they feel the need to be unkind, which is very unfortunate. It's just a bag of fabric. Sometimes I have an easier time getting past it and still doing things anyway. Thankfully, it hasn't really happened to me at all. I mean, that sounds like I'm very lucky, and why am I even talking about it if it hasn't really happened to me? Because I know that it will. That, like, inevitably it will happen, and that I already know I'm not going to deal with it well when it does happen, and that's scary. Because I do have depression and anxiety, and can recognize when comments are not constructive and when they're not valid, and still treat it like it is. Still treat it like maybe there's a possibility that what those people are saying about me is true. And in my mind, I've twisted it into being a form of maturity to not just discount criticism from people. And to a certain extent, it is not maturity. Sometimes people are just mean, and there's literally no merit to the things they're saying, and you don't have to pay attention to it. You don't have to give it, wow, this box. You don't have to give it any of your time. And that doesn't mean it's easy not to. Archie, this is a box cutter, and I don't really want you here. Yes. So the realm of things that can hurt my feelings, unfortunately, is very broad. One thing that really gets to me is when people make comments, even if there's no malicious intent behind it. If people comment on my pricing, it will get to me just because I know from my end that I undercharge for what I do. And that is for a few reasons. One, being afraid of if I charge how much I should charge for the actual time that it takes to create the candles, then no one would buy them, because it would be, if I charged like a reasonable hourly wage for myself, just no one would pay that much for a candle. So I'm not going to charge that much, which means that my labor, essentially I just don't charge for labor, honestly. My pricing is judged on essentially only the cost of goods. Which is not a good way to price your products. I don't recommend it to people, but because of my anxiety in terms of people saying unkind things about pricing, it's just something that I have learned to accept is something that I'm going to do. So I know that people talking about pricing isn't mean necessarily, but it does really get to me because I already know that I'm doing more to make my products affordable than I have to. So it does kind of feel like a personal attack when people will still be like, you're charging $20 for a candle? Like, you're ripping people off. And like, I know that that's not what I'm doing. But I'm still going to take those comments and convince myself that, maybe they're right. Maybe I am still charging too much. And kind of just discredit the actuality of the situation in which I am literally not charging enough. Again, no, those aren't mean comments necessarily, but they still affect me in the same way that personal attacks would. Also, this is a very specific topic that I just don't like talking about because it stresses me out. I did have one TikTok video that went like viral by my standards. And I did get a handful of comments of people that were just like, I hope Taylor Swift sues you. So yeah, it hurts when people are just like, I hope that you get sued for what you're doing. And my personal opinion on if that's fair or not, sometimes I just don't want to get into it. So I'm actually going to save these boxes because I am going to need them to transport my candles for the pop-up event. So I'm not going to break these down, which unfortunately does mean that they are just going to live here. But yes, again, I know that those are not necessarily like personal attack comments, but they're certainly not constructive. Day to day it changes on how much it bothers me and how much it can stop me from actually putting myself out there, I guess. In general, I am personally just trying to build up, I guess, generally my confidence and my self-esteem. I don't fully have any solid methods on how I'm doing that, other than, I guess, like therapy. Understanding that people will be mean and that the things that they say just are not warranted and they're not true, and you don't need to give them the time of day. Or you accept how it makes you feel, but then you're able to move on from it. Because if something really upsets me, I'll hold on to it for days and really feel like I did something wrong. Even if I know that I didn't, like, my brain will not let me accept that I didn't actually do anything. I don't know if that's, like, fully good advice or anything. I think the only way to deal with it is to learn how to feel your feelings, because it's not gonna help you to reject the way you're feeling or refuse to let it upset you, because it probably will, and if you ignore it, maybe you'll feel better in the moment, but it's still going to be in there somewhere. Not everything that people have to say is true, and it certainly isn't kind, and that doesn't mean it has to define you. It doesn't have to rule over your life, and there is a way to just let it go. I don't know what that way is yet, but if I find out, I will share that information. Now I'm going to move on to my desk area and talk about not feeling good enough and imposter syndrome, which is a lot to unpack there. At least once a week, if not almost every day, I will literally have the thought, what if I never make another good candle in my entire life? Which sounds very dramatic, because it is, but sometimes I really have that moment where I'm like, what if I've just hit my peak? I've already made the best scent I'm ever gonna make. I'm just never gonna live up to that again. That's not necessarily the most valid way to think about it, though honestly, I do really romanticize my first collection, which was Folklore. I really do think that nothing's ever gonna top that for me in terms of how natural it felt to make those scents and just my connection to that album. I just feel like I'm never gonna make a collection that's that meaningful to me again. I mean, I care about every collection that I do, and I still approach creating scents that I feel like really do represent the songs just as seriously every time. I do try to hold myself to a very high standard of, like, I never want to be that person that just creates something and is like, yeah, here it is, it's Taylor Swift themed, and like didn't actually put a lot of thought into it. I never want to get to a place where like I'm okay doing that. So in my brain, I know how much thought and effort I put into every collection and everything I make, but sometimes it still feels like it's not enough. And I'm afraid that people are going to just have that thought that like maybe they got something from the Folklore collection and they really like that candle, and everything they've gotten since then is just kind of like, oh, it's not really the same. You know, like it's not as good as like her first stuff. Which sounds very weird to talk about when you're just talking about candles. But that is something that scares me all the time, is that people will have this perception that I'm not good enough and my products aren't good enough. And I really try to make it obvious how much thought I put into everything that I do, because I don't want to be perceived as someone who's just creating literally anything and throwing Taylor's name on it, because that's not what this means to me. And generally, like, that is just literally what imposter syndrome is. Like, no matter how much you try to convince yourself that, like, you know you're doing all you can, like, if you believe in the work that you're doing and you believe in the things you're making and, like, that's still not enough, then there's nothing, sometimes it feels like there's nothing that can save you from imposter syndrome, because, like, what more can you do other than know that you're doing your best? But also there's the part of, like, what if I'm doing my best and my best still isn't good enough? I do constantly have to ask myself, is it not good enough for me? Or am I afraid it's not good enough for other people? And it's probably a mix of both, because, like I said, I do hold myself to, like, probably an unreasonably high standard. I do feel like everything I do has to be perfect within some non-existent guideline, which doesn't help, because how can you meet expectations if the expectations don't actually exist in any capacity? Which essentially means I'm usually setting myself up for failure, or to convince myself that what I'm doing isn't good enough. I know that I'm rambling a little bit at this point. So to move on to how I combat that, I guess, it is, like, a little redundant, I suppose, but a lot of things with business come back to building up self-confidence. Unfortunately, if you're not confident in yourself, you're never going to feel good enough. You're never going to be confident in what you're doing and what you're making, and it's going to haunt you forever. Because Halloween. In my journey to try to build more self-confidence and kind of battle imposter syndrome, trying to really believe that you are giving it your all and that is good enough, and also that there will always be people that don't like what you're doing. Like, whether they aggressively don't like it or that it's just not for them, like, there's literally no avoiding that, as much as that, like, understanding and reality can feel personal and can hurt. It literally is just reality. Like, everything you do isn't for everybody. As much as you want it to be, and as much as you try to make it be for everyone, it just can't happen. So specifically with creating, I do think when it comes to, like, monetizing your work, there is a little bit of pressure to create what the people want rather than what you want. And I do think that there can be a balance in there of not, like, half-ass creating things that you don't actually want to make just because you think other people want it. Because essentially, how are you going to be confident in those things if you don't really actually like them yourself? Honestly, I'm, like, going on a tangent. I don't even know where I'm going with this anymore. But I do think it's important to, like, really be passionate about what you're doing. Because even though it can feel very vulnerable and scary to just give things your all and, like, execute it in the way that you want to and the way that you envisioned it rather than what you think everyone else wants, I think in some ways that is, like, the best way to feel confident in the things you're making, because if you can make it exactly what you wanted it to be, then hopefully that can make you happy and that can make you feel confident without necessarily worrying about what everyone else thinks, because that's literally something you can't control, which is never gonna be easy to accept or be okay with. But literally you can't control what other people think of the things you create and their level of satisfaction with it. All you can do is create things that you believe in, that you're passionate about, in a way that makes you happy and in a way that you feel like you've done the best you can. And I think that as long as you keep that as like the core value of your business and what you're doing, then that's like kind of all you can do. Which, yes, a lot of these things have to do with like just accepting what you can't control. But I think coming to terms with the fact that the only person that you can really satisfy is like completely is yourself. And if you're doing that, then you're doing everything that you can. You should just be happy with yourself and the things that you're making. And even if trying your hardest doesn't look the same every day, that's okay, because I think you understand where your different levels of like trying your hardest in that section of your life really is, because it's not always going to be the same, and that's okay. The level of what you believe is not good enough needs to only be from your own lens. Because you can't make assumptions about what other people are going to assume is good enough and what other people are going to feel is satisfactory. Because one, that's going to be different for everybody. So you can't please all those people. And most of the time you don't actually know what their expectations are in the first place. You're literally just making assumptions. If you can build like the confidence to know that as long as you are living up to your own standards, and that you've gotten your own standards to a place that feel reasonable, I feel like that's ideal for me, I think. I know my standards are not reasonable, but I acknowledge that. And if I can get them to a place where they're reasonable, and I know that I'm satisfied with what I'm doing, then if I can live a life where I accept that that is all I can do and that is enough, then I would kind of hope that imposter syndrome wouldn't be as prevalent of a problem as it tends to be. But like, I know that is the thing that I need to work on to get there. So yeah, again, very rambly, very therapy session, but that's kind of what this is, I guess. I guess we will move on to the next part now that my desk is clean. Okay, so next on the list we have finances, which I don't think really needs a lot of explanation. I think everyone ever worries about money and finances, but the dynamic is a little different when you own your own business. Usually when you're just an employee somewhere, you don't have a lot of say in how much money you're making and all that, but when you own your own business, it's all on you, which can be very stressful. This topic is mostly like, I guess, solution oriented. Not that I have like all of the solutions, but I can just share like what I've done. So a candle business is, if you want to start a small business with not a lot of upfront cost, candles isn't really the way to go. If you're just like doing it as a hobby and for yourself, it's not like necessarily the cheapest, but like you can still get a kit and experiment with it on your own. But once you start doing larger quantities of candles, then prices tend to skyrocket. And also, it's not as bad as it was right smack dab in the middle of quarantine, but shipping prices for candle supplies is outrageous. And I mean, I know candle supplies, like, they literally do weigh a lot, but honestly, sometimes shipping can be more than I'm not really doing any cleaning apparently. Sometimes shipping can end up being more than the actual supplies that you're ordering, which just really hurts to see. So yeah, I guess sometimes candles specifically is not for the faint of heart. I don't think I didn't go in like blindly. I'm sorry if I'm scaring you. I do, typically when I start a new hobby or anything, I do an insane amount of research. Like an unnecessary, well, it helps. It's fully unnecessary, but a lot more research than I feel like a normal person would do. Pretty much within like a year of me starting the business, the prices for everything changed so much because of COVID that it did kind of feel like I was a little bit out of my depth. Everything, the prices that I thought everything were going to generally stay at, like obviously there would be some amount of inflation, was just no longer what was happening. So all of the numbers that I had run, all of my spreadsheets in terms of like how much I needed to price my products to make a profit, all of that was just like completely thrown out of whack. You are so needy today. Do you want to hang out under the desk? That seems cozy, doesn't it? So essentially all of the calculations and numbers that I had in the beginning of starting the business were pretty much not at all close to accurate within like a year. So that was really stressful. During that time, I feel like I didn't really release much, and I didn't really do you're so ridiculous. I didn't really do a lot of candle stuff. Solutions or advice. Yes. At least for me, I know that like the level at which I take things seriously enough to have like spreadsheets and running documentation on things, like sometimes I will. Anyway, what I was saying was pretty much as soon as you get an inkling that what you're doing is something you want to turn into some type of business, start spreadsheets and start keeping track of almost everything you do, at least like financially. Keep your receipts. It's a lot of the time now, if you have like an account with a supplier, it's really easy to keep track of like your receipts and your orders and stuff. So I guess that's one bit of advice, is that once you start ordering from a supplier, make sure you make an account with them so that all of your past orders and receipts are contained in that account so you can go back and find them. If you are in a position where you're buying from places that are like physically you're there and you have to print out receipts, make sure you keep those, or a lot of places can email you receipts now, but definitely keep all that information. House it in a spreadsheet. Maybe one day I'll go over how I have my spreadsheet set up. It's not like the best, but you know, maybe I'll share that. But anyway, just try to make a spreadsheet of generally how much you are spending and how much you're making, because knowing that ratio is very important, because you can just be losing money and maybe not really even realize, because definitely expenses can add up really quickly. There are other systems, I guess, of releasing products and formatting your business that can mitigate upfront costs. Like, I know some people will just do pre-sale, so they only make the amount of, my brain is so scattered right now, and buy the amount of products that they need for the sales that they've already made through pre-sale. I have not personally done that. If I ever start making more sales, I might kind of do that method, especially because I'm running out of storage space for candles. So if I don't have to have them pre-made all the time, then I don't necessarily have a storage problem anymore. But that's one way to kind of minimize upfront costs is to only buy these supplies and put in the time to make products that you know are technically already sold. But then you do have the commitment of you need to make all of those things in the time frame that you sold them in, and you are now held responsible for all of those orders of products that aren't made yet. So that's just not something that really works for me, but it does work for some people. So yeah, in general, I feel like for finances is, if you have, like in summary, if you have the means to start a business that you really want to start, that does include a lot of upfront costs. Just kind of understand, I guess, that that's what you're doing, and commit to it. That doesn't mean it's not going to feel scary, but amount that you have to spend is going to be the amount that you have to spend. And if you're not sure, or you're not in a position where you can spend all that money up front, there are plenty of business ideas that don't have a lot of upfront costs, and there's also pre-order format, which can be a little more, like, it can feel more safe, I suppose. But yeah, I mean, in general, I just, like, I know that money for everyone is always going to be really stressful. It definitely stresses me out all of the time. And I feel like I'm constantly trying to come to terms with the fact that running a business, like, that's just what it is. You have to spend money to make money, and I know it's, like, really cliche. Yeah, it is just I guess a lifestyle that, if that's what you want, that's kind of just what the commitment is going to be. Yeah, I don't know. Not really that deep. But I know it's scary. It's always going to be scary, and, you know, you just have to, like, you have to do what you can to live with it and be okay with it. This area is always particularly scary and intimidating for me. So we'll see how this goes. Oh no. So the next thing on the list is making mistakes and letting customers down. I feel like maybe that sounds kind of dramatic, but honestly, like, that's how it feels. Specifically with candles, I suppose, and the way that I sell candles, which is online for the most part, there is a lot of fear that constantly consumes me because people are buying candles that they have not smelled yet. They're only buying them based on my description of them online. And if that is not going into like buying a product blindly, like, I don't know what is. So essentially, like, every order I get, there is the chance that someone will get it and not actually like it. I am very happy to say that has actually not happened to me yet. I mean, I feel like I've had, like, maybe one or two where people have been like, oh, it's not quite what I thought it was gonna be, but, like, they didn't ask to return it or, like, for a refund or anything. But yes, there is always the chance for every single item I sell that people won't actually like it, which is scary all the time. And also for candles specifically, how do I say this? For every part of, like, the candle anatomy, you're going to be ordering in batches. So, like, you know, every box of wax can be different, and every order of wicks can be a little different, and every order of jars can be a little different. And hopefully there's not a lot, like, there's not an insane amount of, like, difference between all of those, but it's always a possibility that you get a batch of wax or jars or wicks that's, like, not great. And that's also really scary because these supplies are pretty expensive. And also, I will literally avoid any kind of confrontation at all costs, which is definitely a detriment to myself. But like, if it comes to trying to return things, I'm not going to be pushy at all. Like, I will let companies take advantage of me, which is like, I know it's embarrassing to admit, but honestly, that is kind of what will happen sometimes. Like, there was a time where I ordered, I want to say like 1,000 wax melt clamshells, and they had holes in them, which they cannot, because then the wax will just literally pour out of the clamshell. And I did end up emailing the company and being like, hey, like 8 out of 10 of these end up having holes in them. And it was really stressful because as I'm pouring, like, I don't know if suddenly there's just gonna be wax like spilling everywhere and it would get on like other clamshells. Like, it was just like a disaster. It was really bad. And so I emailed them and explained what happened, and essentially they were like, well, you need to send us proof, which I get, but that was just a little hard to do because, like, am I gonna record like wax spilling out of the clamshell and getting all over my stuff to prove it to you? But essentially, so they answered and they're like, you need to send us proof, and also someone from UPS is coming tomorrow to pick up all of them, which was like a little counterintuitive because it's just kind of like, well, what if they pick them up and then you don't think that my proof is like accurate and now I don't have a refund and I don't have clamshells. Essentially, I just let it go, which like maybe wasn't the best thing to do, but I just didn't want to get into it with them. And also, the UPS person was just coming at times that like I wasn't home, so it was a little bit of a mess. But anyway, yes, I will avoid confrontation all the time. So if there is something wrong with a batch of my materials, then I'm kind of just out of money. Yeah, it's scary that like, because you can test candles from like a batch of new supplies, but you can't test every candle. Like, you can't light them and then send them to people. You just have to like hope that the candle is going to act the way that you want it to. And for the most part, it always has when I've sent things to customers, which is good. But again, the fear is always there that like, what if this is the batch that somehow something went wrong? But yeah, it's scary because, yeah, sometimes you can send out products that might be imperfect and like not really know because you couldn't actually test it. Thankfully, that hasn't actually happened to me yet, but again, I'm afraid of plenty of things that have never happened to me. In general, like, I know that I'm just extra sensitive when it comes to feeling like I've like let down a customer. Essentially, if I get any negative feedback in any capacity, like I feel like I failed, which is just something that like I personally need to try to understand, like, isn't the end of the world, I guess, because sometimes everything feels like the end of the world, and it shouldn't really be that like if one person has something slightly negative to say that like I consider just like quitting the entire job, because that's not healthy and that's not helping anyone. Okay. But sometimes it does feel like that. So yeah, I mean, also there's like from a sympathizing with the creators aspect, a lot of the time people are gonna, like, they're trained to be kind of dramatic with their feedback. I think sometimes review culture is like a little bit toxic, and people just say things that like are not necessary to say. But yes, if you do make a mistake, if something goes wrong that was out of your control and it upset a customer, all you can really do is, you know, be kind about it as long as the customer is being kind to you. If they're not being kind to you, like unsolicited, just being mean, like don't let them walk all over you. But also like don't go crazy. But you know, just try to deal with it in a calm fashion and know that like it's not your, like most of the time it's not going to be your fault. It's not something you could have controlled. And it's also not the end of the world. I know it can feel like the end of the world, but it's not. Like, I feel like sometimes I'm like overly aware that like I'm literally just selling candles. Like, it's really not that big of a deal. It's not that profound. But some people will make you feel like it is the worst thing you could possibly have done to them. I know that hasn't happened to me here, but in my previous job, especially when it came to Christmas, I was told that the company I worked for before had ruined several Christmases because shipping delays, which always happens during Christmas, and like their product didn't show up on time. And it was not an end-all, be-all product. Like, it was not a big deal. It was a hobby product, but people would come at you like they'd say, like, you ruined Christmas. And I'm just like, you need to calm down. Because I'm gonna actually feel like I ruined your Christmas, even though I know that this is not that big of a deal. And so yeah, people are gonna be like really dramatic and try to make you feel bad. And sometimes, unfortunately, it's going to work. But give yourself some time and realize that like it's really not that deep. Also, I've had a lot of jobs in a lot of different industries, and people can be dramatic about what they consider you like letting them down with across the board. When I worked in restaurants, I've had people threaten to sue me because their food was cold. Like, people can be really dramatic, and unfortunately, I'm the kind of person that no matter how outrageous their claim is, some part of me will feel bad and like I actually did something wrong. But you have to learn to understand when their comments about how you've let them down are like actually valid or not, and proceed accordingly. Because there's some negative feedback that you can learn from, and there's some negative feedback where the only thing that you learn is that people are mean. I guess that's it. People make mistakes, it happens. It's, you know, you can do your best to avoid it, but it's gonna happen. There's gonna be customers that feel let down even if you did everything right. They're gonna try to make it feel like it's your fault, and it's not. And if it is your fault, admit that you made a mistake, and that's all you can do. And learn from the mistake, admit that you did it, and move on from there, I guess. Okay, I guess this area is going to be like a two-parter because there's like higher and lower. But the next topic is having to show up on the internet. This is something that I'm very passionately afraid of. Putting yourself out there is like constantly scary for a lot of reasons. Kind of going back to the first one about getting like not constructive criticism and like just mean comments. But I think also there's just kind of like, what parts of yourself do you show? Specifically when it comes to having a small business, what's the balance of like how much of your personal life that you share and how much is just like strictly business? And that balance is going to be different for everyone. I feel like I'm constantly going back and forth of like what I want that balance to be for myself. Criticism of your business and your products can feel just as personal as if people were saying things about like literally you. There is still like some degree of separation because you can just be like, oh, they don't actually know anything about me. They don't know me. And then the more that you share your personal life, you don't really have that barrier anymore. That can be difficult, like knowing where to draw the line. And then just like in a technical aspect, if people are following you for your business, if they're following you for your business and you're showing them like your personal life, is that what they even want to see? Will they stop following you because you're showing too much of your personal life? I guess with this one specifically, there's not really like a right or wrong answer. It really is what you're comfortable with. There definitely is an audience that wants to see the small businesses that they support and they follow as the person that they are. Like they actually do want to see your life and connect with you. And I think that those are the kind of people that I want to connect with as well. And like that's the kind of audience that I want to attract. I like talking to the people that follow me. Like I like having connections with them, and that's not what everyone always wants. Yeah, I do think that part of it is just kind of like that acceptance of that you are not going to be for everyone and everyone's not going to be for you. And if someone was following your business and they don't like how much of your personality or like how much of your personal life that you share and they don't want to follow you anymore, like that's just that's going to be what it is. But that also doesn't mean that you have to change and that you have to pretend to be someone that you're not just to try to please everyone, because you're not going to be able to please everybody ever, unfortunately, no matter how hard you try. Also, just like social media in general, I think we all know it's just a little toxic and it can kind of skew your feelings of like self-worth, the worth of your company and your products, and like if you don't get the feedback that you were hoping to get, yeah, it's always going to be scary because you're being vulnerable with a bunch of strangers, essentially. I mean, I know you'll build some kind of relationship with people, but a lot of the time it's people that you don't really know very deeply, and you never know how they're going to react to the things that you're sharing. I do share some parts of my personal life that are a lot more vulnerable, but like I will talk about my mental health struggles and just generally like the struggles of owning a business. I do go back and forth about like if that's, I guess, appropriate for me to share on like a business account, but I do just kind of bring that back to like trying to attract the kind of people that you actually want to connect with, because I do think being open about those kinds of things is important. And if someone doesn't like it, then we're just maybe not for each other. And for the people that do appreciate or like connect to the vulnerable things that you're sharing, and like it's helpful for them in a sense to like have that reassurance that they're not the only person struggling, that's more worth it to me than if someone's like, oh, that girl's like oversharing, I don't really like her. Which thankfully no one's ever said that to me, but maybe people have like unfollowed me because like I overshare about that stuff. The messages that I'll get from people that are like thank you for sharing that, because you know, I'm going through that too, and like I never see anyone talk about it, and that's like why it's important for me to share those things. But it definitely is being incredibly vulnerable with people, which is scary. Okay, I guess we're flipping things over to this area. And I feel like that was like a good segue into the next topic, which is like being consistent. Which is really hard for me personally. The personal problems that I have with being consistent is definitely that I do struggle with mental health. I see, this is even like, I know that like I share these things on Instagram, and like sometimes it's easier to like write about them than like actually talk about them. I struggle with depression and anxiety, panic disorder, OCD. I have a long list of lovely problems. Also, I have premenstrual dysphoria disorder, which I don't see a lot of people talking about, but essentially what it is just like PMS like 100 times worse than like the average person, which will just be like, yes, maybe someone in normal PMS will just like get a little emotional, a little moody, but for me it's like 75% of the time it just turns into like a full-on depression, whether I want it to or not, on like a consistent schedule, which is nice. No matter where I am in my life at that point, when it is that certain week, I will just get depressed. Like, I don't have a say in it, and it's not really for any particular reason. It's just that's what the hormones and the chemicals in my body decide to do, which is very frustrating, and it definitely is a big hindrance to running a business. And I know that like no one's ever going to be 100% like 100% of the time, but it's hard when like you see it coming. Like, you know, like this is going to be a bad week for me and there's nothing I can really do about it. So yeah, I mean, like it's kind of like maybe sometimes the week prior I will have a lot of ideas and a lot of motivation, and then when it comes time to actually produce things and like get the ball rolling on things, by that time like maybe my mental state and like my mentality about everything is totally different, and I no longer have that motivation. I'm no longer excited about the ideas that I had, and it's like hard to push through that. It's very hard to be like consistent in everything, like in making new products, in restocking products, in being on social media, when like you're kind of just on this schedule of this week I feel really motivated to make things happen and the next week not so much. And like that also makes it really hard when you have launch dates for things, or like if you're on any kind of solid schedule of when things need to get done, you're not at all in the same mental space. Your capacity to actually create and do the work is so different than when you planned on those dates happening. I don't know. It's really hard because, you know, you want to just do it, but your brain says no and your body says no. Just like being consistent is hard. Like nobody feels the same way every day. I think just for some people it's easier to push through not feeling like you can do it that day, and for some people it's really hard, and like it does definitely make me feel bad about myself and like compare myself to other businesses that I feel like are constantly just like go go go. And yes, maybe they do have like a bunch of obstacles that they overcome behind the scenes that like they don't share. Even if that's the case, it is just kind of like, why can they overcome it and I can't? Which doesn't make you feel good about yourself. It's just hard because like you want to be able to overcome those obstacles, but it's just, maybe it's harder for you than other people. And in terms of like coping with it, I feel like, at least for me, I know it's gonna come from a balance of learning to accept my limitations for what they are, but also knowing when I think I can push myself a little further and not constantly giving in to the depression and like the thoughts of not being able to do it and not being good enough, and pushing through those times of like really low motivation, which again, that's not something that's like a consistency thing, because I feel like I want to learn how to do it and do it every time. And that's like, I need to also accept that that's not going to happen. Like, there's going to be times where maybe I can push through it and get more done than I thought I could. And then there's going to be times where I can't. And I need to be okay with like both of those realities. And again, I know that my coping mechanisms are not going to be the same for everyone. So I feel like in that sense, it's kind of like problems that keep you from being consistent are okay. And you don't always have to try to push past them. And then the other side where like maybe you can push yourself a little further. The obstacles that you face don't always have to be obstacles. But if you are struggling with them enough, do not hate yourself for not being able to like push through them in that particular time of your life. So now I guess the last thing, which is connected to many of the other things, is I guess like how my choice to have a small business and like do things the way that I do, how that makes me be perceived by people. And this is not because anyone has said anything or done anything that has made me feel this way, but it's just like a constant thing in my mind. And I know it is something that a lot of people who have their own business have experienced, is that like nobody takes them seriously. Like they'll get comments like, oh, are you still doing like your little thing, or really like downgraded as if like it's not a real career, it's not a real life path, which I don't personally believe is true. I feel like a lot of the time, like I will assume that people look down on me because I'm trying to have my own business rather than like trying to do like have some grand like CEO position, which like is definitely not for everybody. It certainly wasn't for me. But yeah, I assume that people look down on me for choosing to do what I'm doing. Honestly, it ends up being kind of the opposite when I finally do talk to some people about it. I feel like because I have this assumption that people think that what I'm doing is stupid and like not a real job, that I often don't share a lot about like my day-to-day and like the business stuff with either like new people I meet who want to know what I do, or like even just my friends. Like I won't really talk about work because it feels so different from like a standard job, especially since I've had so many traditional jobs. Like I can see the difference, and sometimes it does feel really ridiculous when people when like they're talking about their work experience and it's like, yeah, my boss is being like really unfair to me, or like I'm really worried about like meeting this quota, or like just traditional like work problems. And then like my problem is like social media. Like, and I know that marketing is like a real thing. It just feels in comparison like so ridiculous for people to kind of share their stories about work when it's like traditional work problems. And then I'm like, yeah, I don't have as many followers as I want to have, or like I just feel so stupid like having some of the problems that I do, which isn't fair. But I keep a lot of the parts of the job to myself because I'm afraid of being judged by other people of like what my day-to-day looks like and what my responsibilities are. But like I was getting to earlier, I feel like it has been kind of the opposite when it comes down to it, because when I finally do feel comfortable enough like talking to people about what it's like running your own business, a lot of the feedback that I get is like, that sounds really hard. Like, I would never want to do that. I haven't fully internalized that like there are people that think that it is a serious job and that it is difficult, because it's so ingrained in my brain that they're gonna be like, you're just doing like a stupid little thing, like how could you possibly have like real problems? In reality, that has not been the case, even though that's how it feels in my mind. Yeah, in terms of like advice for that, because I don't know how common it is for people to feel that way. I feel like that's a specific topic I haven't like talked to a lot of other business owners about. I feel like it is just gonna be that like the more interactions I have with people where I am open about what I do, and the more feedback I get that people do take it seriously and like are not judging me for it, then perhaps I can like try to learn that people are not constantly judging me the way that I think that they are. Then maybe it won't be as big of a concern for me anymore. That's definitely just going to be up to me and like sharing more of what I do with either strangers or like the people in my life, because I'm also guilty of kind of minimizing the things that I do, which I think is just like a defense mechanism. I don't know, I feel like maybe in some ways when I explain what I do, like, I make it sound stupid, or I make it sound like it's not that hard, or it's not that big of a deal, which doesn't do me any favors, because then I'm essentially just asking people to view me the way that I'm afraid they're gonna view me. I need to, personally, learn how to actually talk about what I'm doing and normalize that, and not kind of feed into the stigma that people who own their own businesses are just doing like a little hobby thing that's not gonna work out, because that's not the case at all for a lot of people, and I don't want to keep like spreading that kind of vibe. So I haven't cleaned everything, but honestly this is a lot better. So I'm gonna tidy up a few things and then I guess just do like a little wrap up thingamajig. But the office, it feels like way better right now. And I don't actually feel like I did that much work, because I was so focused on what I was saying that I just was not thinking about the cleaning part at all, which was amazing. Highly recommend if you think that maybe that method will work for you. For this particular video, I do feel a lot more self-conscious than the previous one. I guess partially because it is like talking about vulnerable things, which previously I have only like written about on Instagram. I haven't really like gotten in front of a camera and like talked to anyone about it. I also feel like that for me personally, even though it's scary, it is worth it to me to maybe share some like difficulties or like challenges that maybe other people facing like don't see people talking about. So I guess I'm just hoping that like if any other like small business owners or creators are like struggling with things, that like the least that this could do is just be like, oh, you know, like I feel a little bit better because someone else is also struggling with that, and like it's not just me, because I know I convinced myself that I'm the only person that like struggles with the things that I do, which is not at all accurate. But sometimes you do need that reminder of just someone else talking about it to be like, okay, like I'm just gonna reset and know that like I'm not crazy. Problems are like not just a me thing, like there's not something inherently wrong with only me, and everyone else can live their life normally. I still don't know how to end videos at all. If you watched, thank you. Thank you to all of my friends who have been supportive in me doing this. I really was afraid that people would just be like, like, why is she making videos and putting them online? Like, that's really cringy. But thankfully that's not like the feedback I've gotten, so thank you. And if this was perhaps helpful to anyone, I hope that it was. And yeah, all of that was scary. Cleaning was scary. Talking about vulnerable things was scary. So like, happy Halloween, I guess. I guess similar to how the other video ended, goodbye.